everyone, welcome back to another fantastic episode on the Unleashing Potentials podcast. My name is Bernadette Desir and I'm your host. And joining me today is Debbie. How are you?
Hi, I'm great and glad to be with you.
Yes, yes. Debbie, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I can't wait to hear your journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you want me to go ahead?
Yeah. I wanted to start with what it is that you do, and then we'll connect it with adoption and so on.
Okay, sure. So a little bit about me is I am a CEO of a very large kind of nonprofit down here in the Houston, Texas area that's called Anchor Point. And our work here means that we do a lot of work with families who have adopted, who have children that we call our children from hard places or have challenges and traumas in their background. And a lot of times those parents are overwhelmed and they don't know quite what to do. And the child is losing it, the parents taking it personally, they're losing it, the child loses it, and it becomes a very vicious cycle. And so one of our goals is really to work with those families to help them learn how to thrive together and work through some of the healing that maybe needs to happen. And then what can they do as a family to move forward together? So that's the work that I do a lot of times with a lot of families. I also am an adoptive mom of 9 children, 3 different sibling groups that come out of the foster care system. And we've had those children for 23, 24 years. So they're now ages 19 through 33 or so. And now they are having my grandbabies, which also maybe sometimes still have some trauma stuff that we need to deal with. So it not only is in my work environment, adoption is very near and dear to our heart. When we couldn't have children and then we lost quads, and then this was kind of the route that God took us was on looking at adopting children that could maybe use a loving home. So I'm on that side of it. And then I have lots of kids on your side of it that have been adopted from that side.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know you're in Texas.
Mhm,
Um, I have family and I know lots of adoptees that are specifically in Texas, but all over the states. I don't know
mhm,
if you've heard of Mercy International.
mm-mm.
Um,
Oh,
you haven't? Okay, okay.
yeah.
There's so much connection to adoption, and at times we just don't know where they are. But thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Walk us through your journey of, having to lose quads. That's three, isn't it? Is that four?
4.
Four.
Yeah, that's
Okay, okay,
4. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay. Because my birth mom was pregnant with three and
Hmm.
lost two. And the one
Hmm.
that survived is got put up for adoption as well. But
Hmm.
take us through your journey. You can share as much or as little as you'd like to.
Sure. Well, I would tell you, just kind of from the funny part is, I don't know, as a young girl, I was always like, I want to be a young grandma. That's what I want to be. And so this is my mission, and I'm very set on it, right? I'm going to be a young grandma. And so I, uh, I also had this great love of life. And somewhere early on in my journey, my parents said there was a newspaper article that had a woman that was abusing her children and stuff like that. And my parents put that on the table and they said, if you're going to be so for life, then you need to be willing to adopt children like these. And I thought, sure, I'd do that. And that was just like when I was 14, 15 years old. That just kind of went in the back of my mind, right? But I was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I do that? And so off life goes, get to college, meet my husband, want to get married early while we're in college. And because I have this plan to get started on these kids, because I want these to be this young grandma. And my husband says, no, we have to wait till we graduate, do everything in order. And I'm like, great, fine. So we graduated, and ultimately, I was like, we got married. I was like, let's get started. And off we go on this journey of trying to get pregnant. Infertility was part of our journey. And for 4 or 5 years, we tried different things and couldn't get pregnant. And then we ended up on a study at the Baylor College of Medicine where we were on a fertility drug versus the placebo. And we had 3 tries to get pregnant. And in that journey, we didn't get pregnant until the very last try. And when we went to the doctor, we went to two doctors on the same day, two different ultrasounds. They both told us we were having twins. And we were ecstatic because I was like, sweet, I want four kids. I'll do it two at a time. This is great. Well, we've been trying so hard and I'm getting older. I need to be this young grandma. And off we go and tell our family. Everybody's excited. Around 13 weeks, I end up going up into the Exxon building where I worked, and in the elevator, I started bleeding everywhere. And I thought for sure I was going to lose these boys. And they sent me to the emergency room. They got everything kind of under control. And they said, we hear a heartbeat, but we don't know if it's both of the heartbeats or it's one, but you're going to go home and rest and then go to your high risk doctor. Monday, we go to the high risk doctor, sitting in the lobby, patiently waiting. I told my husband, I said, we're going to go in there and we think we're attempting to lose one child, or we might lose the boys, and we're going to go in there and they're going to tell us we're having triplets. So off we go. And as soon as she put the probe on my stomach, I went, oh, there's three. And so she did all her looking around and all her measurements. And next thing you know, she says, let's just take a picture. And she shows us, she gets everybody on the screen. And I was like, oh, there's four. And I said, you don't need to look anymore. Cause I said, this is high risk. And if there's 6, 7, 8, 9 in there, it doesn't matter. It's just, and so off we go. And I realized how precious every day was to get to the next day, because it's very hard to carry that many children. And around 26 weeks, I woke up one morning and my water broke, and I realized that I was going to have to go to the hospital to see if I could make it to 30 weeks, because that was kind of the goal. And when we got to the hospital, that first night I asked my husband to stay with me. The next morning I woke up and one of the babies had stuck their hand out my stitched cervix and said, hello, I'm coming. And the doctor told us we would have to deliver the baby. And my husband asked if there was any way to save the other three. And they said it depends on what Debbie's body does, how she handles it. And the first child was born, and because their lungs were not developed enough to survive, they simply placed the child in my arms until the child passed away. And so I just held them, and little Zach took his hand and wrapped it around my finger and squeezed as if to say, Mom, I'm here. And I just loved him, and slowly he passed away. And then my body couldn't handle it. I broke out in a huge fever. My blood counts were all screwed up. I was getting very sick. And so they induced the other boys, and the other boys came shortly thereafter, and they placed them in my arms. And they went into eternity. And so that night in the hospital, one of the things that I really learned was I was like, I don't know what else to do but to trust God in this situation, because I've tried everything and I want to be this young grandma, and I got this heart for it and I don't know how to do this. And so I just made a decision to trust him. And one of the things that we do when we all find ourselves in overwhelming or difficult situations is a lot of times we ask the question, why? Why this? Why me? Why God? It's the question that we all have when things are hard. And that was the question I was asking. And God gently prodded me and said, hey, I need you to give me the why question. And I was kind of like, I really liked my why question, but he said, give it to me anyway. So I was like, okay, I'll give you my why question, but what am I going to do? And he's like, ask me, how do I survive? And so that became my question. And sometimes I held on to that for like 5 minutes and sometimes 30 seconds. And I have to recommit myself to how do I survive? And the truth that I learned was simply to breathe and to take the next best step. And so I began taking the next best step that I knew. And he began walking me through a healing process of the deep grief and the deep loss that goes with losing children. And then the question changed. The question changed to how do I survive? Not from how do I survive to how do I thrive? Because I didn't want to be stuck. My boys would be 30 years old now, and I didn't want to be stuck 30 years down the road and not be able to move forward in my life, right? And so what I did was I said, okay, God, how do I thrive? And he gave me opportunity to minister and work with a lot of women who have lost children over the years and love on them and help them work their way through their grief. He opened up this idea in us of adoption. And would we be willing to take in other children? It kind of birthed this idea in us, which was really that seed that was planted a long time ago. And then it ultimately led to the starting of Anchor Point, which impacts thousands of people each and every year. And ultimately the book, The Heart of Legacy, and the stuff that we do now. But I would say, the journey of getting to adoption for our family required us to go through some of the steps of losing children, and because it probably would have never been on my radar, right? And so we did sit down, just so you kind of have a feel for it. When we were thinking about whether or not we'd try and get pregnant again, I just was too emotionally drained and taxed, and my body was just too, and I was like, I just can't do that. So we actually said, you know, we could spend our time trying to pursue fertility options and spend thousands of dollars that way and never end up with children that we could love and give a loving home to. Or we could pursue children that we know are in desperate need of families to step in with them and come alongside them. And so we just sat down and pondered things like, I remember going, okay, can I love someone that's not my blood? Right? That's a question that an adoptive parent often has. And the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? I love my husband and he doesn't have my blood.
Yeah.
So there must be a way to do this, right? That you can do this. And so we just began, that's how we began, kind of just walking down, trying to figure out if that was a good fit for us and what we would do in the adoption arena, because I believe everybody's called to be a part of that. We just all have different roles to play.
Wow, thank you for sharing. I can only imagine how hard that was
Mhm,
for any parents to lose kids.
mhm, mhm.
It's not easy. It's a piece of you that's gone and missing. And I can see that you've done the healing. You've done the work,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
you're a happy grandma soon, or
Yeah. Oh, actually,
oh,
I have 14 grandkids now.
oh, you do.
So
Wow.
I did get grandkids, and I love them, and they are a ton of fun, and they keep me young. But I can still run around and do all those things. So I met my objective. It just was not the way that the road was not the straight road that in my mind was there. And you know what? It's still been a great road, though. I
Yeah.
mean, it really has, and we wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. So you have nine adoptive kids. Are they all from the States or other parts of the world? What's
Uh,
the
oh,
process?
that's okay. That's a good question. For us, we really felt like we were called to adopt kids that were here locally. So our kids, we did three different adoptions, and three different sibling groups. So our first sibling group was a sibling group of five that was in Tennessee, and they were 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 when they came in our home. And then about 8 years later, we adopted again. And this was a sibling group of two that was from North Texas.
Mhm.
And so that gave us 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. At that point, we were doing just driver's ed and hormones. That's all we do. And then after that, about 3 years later, we adopted another sibling group that were 9 and 11, and then my older ones were on into 22
Mhm.
time frame. The first two sets they were all taken away for neglect and abuse. My first two sets were Caucasian children. They look very similar to us. My youngest two children are African American. And so we have a very blended family from that perspective, with a lot of different issues and a lot of personalities. And it's complex, but it's interesting. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm an adoptee and I was adopted from Haiti. And I know
Mhm.
with different countries, different languages, different government legislations, it's even more complex. So yeah, that's exciting that you did it where you are.
Mhm.
I think at
Yeah.
times there's so many kids that needs a home where we are, but they don't
Right.
always find the home.
Right. And I would tell you just based on because I train adoptive families all the time or people that are interested in foster care and adoption. I train them into kind of what the process is like. And what most people don't realize is that, these kids are sitting there without families and they're legally free, sitting in our systems. And literally, the foster and adoptive systems in the United States would be empty if, like, every fourth church took one child.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, I have nine. So I'm going every fourth church, and we have a ton of churches. If they would, and so encouraging people to step up and step into this space. I love to do that, but I also love to do it with the idea that you better be really called to do this because it is going to be, it's going to
Yeah.
be challenging and it's going to be really good. So you've got to be, as the adoptive mom coming in, I have to be extremely committed to this child because this child has experienced potentially that the people who are supposed to love them are the ones that potentially hurt them. And so they have got these children before they will even come close to opening their heart to me, have to know that I am steady and that I am committed and that I am going to be there no matter how big a high they're having or how big a blowout we're having. And that, that is the process because I'm asking this child who's been hurt to love again, and that's a very risky thing to do, right? And so I think that from adoptive parents, you just got to be super committed, that this is it, we're here and we're going to be here forever no matter what goes
Mhm.
down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you answered my question I was gonna ask, what advice you'd have for adoptive parents or for people who are looking to adopt. Because I don't, people shouldn't do it because so and so's doing it, because it's trending, because it's cute, because
Mhm.
there's a lot of responsibilities that comes to it. As
Yeah,
you
matter of fact, I tell people if I can talk you out of it, I will talk you out of it because you're not ready.
Mm,
you know and I remember very clearly, when we did our second adoption, there was concerns by some of the caseworkers and different things like that that my daughter would potentially be bipolar because of her biological mother.
mm,
And they were really, the judge was going to hold up the adoption because she was just concerned that we didn't understand. And I was like, Chick, you don't get it. I said, one, this is my kid. I'm already committed to this kid. I don't care what label we're going to put on her. And secondly, you don't know that that's what's going to happen when she's older because you can't diagnose that when they're really young. And I said, so give me my kid, because now I've already made a commitment. I'm like, this one's mine. Give her to me. I don't care what the label is. And, the reality is we're very committed to our biological children that way. We wouldn't ever think of turning back from that. And so, I like for families to go in it with their eyes wide open
mhm,
and and trained as much as they can and understanding kind of trauma and working with all that because that is what is going to help you weather the storms that are going to come, because these children have lots of junk. We got to work through junk, and I as an adult have junk, and I will tell you, my for me, the biggest growth had to happen in me versus my kids in any way because I had in my mind, we all parent from the way that we were either raised or the opposite of it because that's just what we know.
mhm.
And unfortunately, our children don't come with instruction manuals. They are the instruction manuals. And so you have to learn. So a lot of these parents want to get in there and do things a certain way and it's not going to work because that kid has trauma in that area. So like if I were to spank my children, that would be a waste of time in a discipline thing because my children have been beat. And, it's not going to work to spank them, just a quick swat on the rear end, or it's not going to work. So if it's not going to work, what am I going to learn and how am I going to do this differently to be able to help this child move forward? Or if I turn too quickly and they brace themselves because they've been hit before, right? I'm going, oh, okay, we got something to work with, And then I think the other big challenge that I always have had is I would always sit around whenever my kids were doing something. I'm going, okay, is this a traumatic kind of behavior? Is this a regular teenager behavior? Or is this just a really belligerent, little child? And a lot of time it was a trauma behavior. And a trauma behavior does not deserve punishment. It deserves for us to compassionately come alongside that child and help that child figure their way. So like I had children that maybe sexually acted out because they had seen things when they were in their parents' homes that they shouldn't have seen, and they just got some relief from it, or so, and so they would do things like rub up against furniture or something like that. I have a kid do that.
Mhm.
And I remember with that child, I would just say, okay, look, here, this is mom's job. Mom's job is to help you understand when you have learned things the wrong way and help you figure out a new way to make your way in the world. And I said, when you do that type of stuff, why do you do that? Well, it feels good, or it relieves stress, right? It's a release. And I was like, okay, well, that's not the best way to do this. So let's talk about other ways we can do this. And when do you find yourself having to do those things? Well, it generally happens when the stress level has gone up, right? They might be in trouble or they're stressed about something. And I'm like, okay, well, what can we put in place so that you and I know how to work on this together so that you can learn you don't have to do this? And how can we get your siblings to help us understand that we're working on something, that they see you doing something, that it's actually good for them to come tell mom, you know, and we're going to figure our way, because that's what good moms do. They help you figure your way. And that's just something, that can take a lot of families by surprise, right? When you got something going on like that. And I just really wanted to have compassionate eyes to really look for what was the trauma stuff going on that we needed to work. And they just needed me to come beside and put my arm around them and go, oh, that's some pretty bad junk, but we're going to figure our way through this. And that is, the skills that I think sometimes families don't have when they go into adoption and understand, so that's why I love training families and doing the therapeutic camps that we do for families that have adopted at Anchor Point and stuff like that, because I think it's invaluable from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing. So based on your experience, how do you think as a culture that we can better advocate for adoptive parents or adoptees?
Mhm. Well, I think one is we need to really know that adoption isn't like a second option. Adoption is so powerful as a way to create a family unit. And it is actually, in my mind, really even more special than just bringing a biological child into the world. That is special, don't get me wrong, but I go, when we can watch God make something beautiful out of tragedy that has happened. And I go, my kids have the ability to reach and touch people that I could never reach if I can help them work their way to wholeness. And they have all these great things. And I find that adoptive children are way more resilient a lot of times than biological children, because resilience is taught in the hard times, right? And so we got lots of hard times, but they need people that will come alongside them. So I think, on the kids side, you want to create an easy way for them to be in homes where people will love and invest in them and value them for who they are. And then on the adoptive parent side, what we want is we want to make sure that adoptive parents understand trauma. They understand the commitment and the gravity of what the decision that they're making, and that it is not a short-term thing. I don't go into my marriage and, in our marriage, the word divorce is off limits, right? We never want to say that. So you don't want to go into an adoption and go, oh, well, I'll just send you back. That's not the option, right? It's, you have to be committed. So I think creating real world awareness for adoptive parents is to say, hey, and then the more we can resource that, I think, and help those parents, I think that's extremely valuable. But I mean, when parents have to grow, we need the tools to know how to grow ourselves. So I always like to say, when a kid is losing it, which they will, and biological or whatever, when they're losing it and they may be cussing at me or saying hard things or doing all these things, I can tell you as the adoptive mom, it feels quite personal at the time, like a personal attack. And I'm like, this really feels personal. And you know what it does is it hits all my trigger buttons of my woundedness. And so I react out of that. And then that causes my kid to react again, and I react again. And now I got this huge tornado that I have to figure out how to land. What I really need to be is I need to be very healthy. My kid loses it. I hear them talking to me like that, but I still can look in their eyes and I can see their preciousness. And what I really hear them say is, Mom, I need you now more than ever, but I don't know how to tell you. Okay. When I can have that, then I can lean in to the situation and be in that tough space with that kid where it's chaotic for them. And I can be the person that helps them calm down, work through their stuff and figure our way. Right. But if my stuff's not taken care of, I blow up and we're off to the races. And then we both bear scars. Right. And we don't want that. And so if I'm not healthy, so I do a lot of work with adoptive parents to say, we got to get healthy. We got to work on our stuff, because if we are not healthy, we cannot, I always say, you cannot lead anyone where you have not been yourself. So I cannot lead a child through healing if I haven't healed my own stuff. So, if I have abuse or I have things like that in my background that get triggered, I got to get some help with that so that I can be fully present for them. And that's where I say, oh my gosh, I had to stretch and grow a lot. My kids think they grew a lot. I'm like, dude, I don't know how much I've had to work on me. God gave me 9 kids to say, Debbie, you got a lot of rough edges. We got to work off. And so that's been our journey, is that we really feel like we have had to grow the most and to be the parents that they really needed us to be.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I wish my mom was alive, my adoptive mom,
Mhm.
to just hear this conversation. Maybe she's watching or listening wherever she is. Uh,
Yeah.
because even though I have the label as an adoptee, it felt like I
Mhm.
was never adopted because I never
Yeah.
experienced any of it. There was just so much triggers, so much trauma on both ends. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's basically taking, excuse me from Haiti and dropping me here. That's it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think I still have lots of questions, lots of anger as to what just happened. What
Sure.
is going on? And I know my bio dad is alive somewhere, and he just
Mhm.
dumps us here. That's it.
Right. Yes. And so, I mean, I really do think what you're saying is, in the heart of every child that has gone through loss or transition and stuff like that is the core question of identity.
Hmm.
And, why was I not good enough? So, I mean, like I tell my children all the time, I'm like, it was not about you not being good enough. It
Hmm.
was about your parent not being ready. And there's a big difference in that.
Hmm.
And then where do we get our worth from? For me, that comes from God. And He's very clear that I am valued, I am loved, I am treasured. and he gives me an identity. I have the same issue. Yours is just magnified because of the transition and the challenges that you had in that spot. But I go, those are what I want people to know is all those questions those kids have, they're normal and they're
Mhm.
good questions. And even biologically intact families, those kids still have identity questions like that. Yours are just magnified. And we want to create a safe space where you can let those out and talk about those, and it be okay to be feeling those things and to know that,
Yeah.
all right, if I can name it, like if I can name that I'm angry, then ultimately I can tame that and put that to good use. So you do the podcast or you do these
Yeah.
other things which allow to make impact. But I think we need to be, as parents, need to be really open to trying to help those kids figure out how to voice those things, and that it's a safe place to do it. It's not a violation. What I always like my kids to know is like, I'm not here to take the place of your biological parents. I just get to be the life mom, and so, we don't want to downplay any of that because you're so blessed that she got you here and got you in this world. And now you have a chance to be a difference maker and you get this great opportunity. And so we're blessed. I said, I couldn't even, from a mom's perspective, I couldn't get my boys all the way here. So this is a blessing now. Just let out that stuff that's inside of you and let's talk through it. Let's work you through it. Let's let God work you through it, whatever it is, or get counseling or do whatever, because um, those are all, there's no bad question. There's no bad thought. They're just, it just is.
Yeah.
And if we can get in that sweet space and that kid can get those types of things out, then what we can see is that we can see them begin to bloom, because a lot of times if they hold it in, then their behaviors are going to be poor. They're going to have maladaptive behaviors. And it's mostly because they don't know how to get their true needs met. And we have to learn how to help them do that and use their words to get their needs met. So that's create what you wanted. And what I want for my children is a safe place for them to process all that.
Mhm.
Well, what we as adoptive parents have to understand is I know my home is safe. I know I am a safe person. I know I'm creating a safe environment. But for this child who is coming into my home, it does not feel safe yet. Okay. And the way we can know when a child truly feels safe is when they can freely laugh and play. Then we know that they feel safe, because you don't laugh and are just carefree unless you feel safe. If not, you're always on guard, right? And so when a kid can laugh, then we can begin to make progress. So when we do our camps, our therapeutic camps that work with kids, it is a ton of fun. I mean, we have fun galore and breakdown central as we learn how to walk through life and, using our words to get our needs met. But I think, for you, those questions, if you've kept them stuffed, then it's hard for these kids because they're going to blow up at some point. And they have to get them out, right? And it's okay. It's okay. Um, you know,
Yeah, yeah. I think I've blown in different ways, silently with you because I
mhm.
have chronic pain, mental health, all the junk that trauma can inflict on people, and yeah, my way of blowing is also doing this because
Yes.
I knew exactly what I signed up for because I do
Mm,
different topics, and then it just
yeah.
kept coming to me. Talk about adoption. Talk. I'm like, no. Talk about
Yes.
adoption. Talk about adoption. I said no.
Mhm.
Right? And I think God has a way of getting his will done. No
Yep.
matter how much I resisted, at this point,
Sure.
I had to remove myself, my ego self, out of the way. Because if it was there, I would not talk about it. Because it's a silent thing that all of us are aware about, but we don't talk about it.
Right. Yeah. And so I think what happens is what, you're saying is you're working through a healing journey and this is causing you to do some of it, which is wonderful.
Mhm.
But I also think, what happens is when we feel like less than or shame and stuff like that, Satan begins to pull us aside and isolate us. Same thing happens in my home if kids are struggling or they act out at church or they act out somewhere and people are looking at me funny because my kids have an emotional outburst and they're, ripping the shelves apart, whatever. Yeah. And, everybody's looking at me. Well, what I have a tendency to do is to pull away and to
Mhm.
isolate myself. And then I began to believe that I'm the only one experiencing this. Okay. And
Mhm.
the reality is we're not. So the only way true healing really, really happens is God has meant for it to happen in community. So for you to tell your story and for me to hear it and for me to still see you as precious and loved and valuable.
Mhm.
And the more you tell your story, the easier it becomes. And then you get to that question of how do I thrive? And God, how can you take this story and make it into something beautiful? It doesn't feel like it started that way. So how can you make it into something beautiful? And that is what he does with your podcast. And forces you to continue to let some of that go. But at the same time, you have probably heard from people that have said, "Oh, that really touched me," or "This really,
All
I
the
never."
time. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. And so, what you're hearing is the beautiful story of God's redemption plan, and how it impacts people because our journey in life is somebody reached back and brought us along. And now our journey is to reach back and to bring them others along. And that's what you're doing is opening up, creating that awareness, creating that safe space so
Mhm.
that something beautiful happens.
Yeah.
And that, so that should be an encouragement to you, even though
It
you didn't
is.
want to do it. And the more you tell your story, I remember like The Heart of Legacy, the book that I just finished writing and put out there.
Mhm.
Um, I have gone through like this imposter syndrome type thing. And then I'm like, God, this is really my personal story. It's not like I've hidden my story from people, but I'm like, you want to put it out there in print and like the
Yeah.
world can see it. I'm like the world. And then I'm like, God, I that's kind of raw, right? And so he had me work through a bunch of stuff to really go, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put it out there and you're going to tell your story more and you're going to get good on more national stages and do this because people need to hear this and people need to know and people need hope that they can see their way through this,
Mhm.
and get to the other side. And so that's the journey you're on. So you just have
Yeah.
a book.
Thank you.
So that's all. Yeah. So,
Yeah, thank you. And I think just talking to you, I can see my mom through you. Uh,
mm,
and the way you talk about your kids, the love that you give them, and the home that you give them, it's a forever home. I'm sure they
mm,
can come and go no matter how old they are and their grandkids.
sure.
And
Hmm.
I think it's something every adoptee should experience, the way you love and treat your kids and how close they are to your heart.
Yeah, and we love them, but I will tell you too, when I'm talking to parents, I'm like, it's a hard road. And we will tell you that 18 to 26 has been the hardest road. And so, a lot of people go, oh, 2 years, 3 years, 8 years, all this stuff. But the reason that 18 to 26 time is hard is because, something magical happens. You turn 18 and you know it all. Okay. And then, and I'm like, you guys don't know it all. I'm trying to tell you. But you
Yeah.
get out into the big world and you know what? Mom can't protect you as much. And the big world is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard and it's out to get you, right? And so, you end up, I've had children that have been prostitutes on the streets. I've had children that have been drug addicts on the streets. I've had children that have sold drugs. I have children that have lived destitute lives, have made hard choices. And you know what? They're still my kiddos. And they are, they need me now there more than ever to be the safe place. And what I've just determined is that, I'm committed to you for life. I really wouldn't have chosen this way to deal with life, but you get to make your choices. But I am the mom that God has given you, and I am committed to stay true to that. So when you hit bottom, I'm here.
Mhm.
When you need me, I'm here. And, I'm going to challenge you to do the right things. My one that was drugs for about 6 years on the streets of Houston, eventually she hit bottom and she finally got in rehab, and she's been doing well for about 2.5 years and has a job and is doing all this stuff. And I'm going, where else would this child potentially be if my husband and I wouldn't have hung in there with her? Because the world would have written her off. And so, that's what I think families need to think about is it's the long haul. It's forever, right? And you're forever going to be there. So do they always do the things I want? And are my kids, if we enter into adoption and we think our kids are going to be super grateful, thankful, and just come hug me all the time and tell me I'm the best mom ever, that's not always going to,
Yeah.
right? What happens is when I become a really safe place
Mhm.
and an adopted child starts to walk through healing, you know what we always do? We always hurt the ones that love us the most, the
Mm.
worst, because it's a safe place. And I know if I'm going through my junk, that you're still going to be there. So
Mhm.
it's not a big deal to wound you with words or to say these types of things. And I'm just like, I'm going to be here. I'm staying. You can do whatever you want, and I'm still going to be your mom.
Yeah.
And if you end up in jail, guess what? I'll come visit you. If you are in this thing, I'm here. And believe me, I've done all those things,
Mhm.
right? And in the end, my daughter that's off the streets doing really well, she would tell me, Mom, I hated you when I was a teenager. I
Mm.
hated you. And it wasn't that she hated me, she hated her life
Mhm.
and she hated where she was stuck and she hated just anything. And so she had a whole kind of growth process to do. And she would tell me now, I realized I was really wrong.
Mm.
And, and there's power in that staying and that redemptive story. And that is, the one thing that an adoptive parent gets to experience is I get the opportunity to love the way Jesus loved. He
Mm.
loves you and me, and we got all our mess and we struck out, and he continues to love us no matter what we dish out, right? And so you get to experience God in a whole new way because you're on the other side. You're now the giver, and God is working through you. You're now the giver. You get to be the grace giver. You get to be all this. And that just takes your relationship with God to a whole new level too, from that perspective. But
Mhm.
and this is a fun statistic, and I'll tell you this because I think this is really helpful for families, is when I'm training families and teaching them how to work with kids or whatever, all adoptive parents and even most parents just in general feel like we're really failures. Okay, like we haven't done all the right things, we didn't get it right, we let you down, all these things. And when I'm coaching parents, one of the things that I tell them is, look, statistically, it says if we get it right,
Mhm.
parenting right, 30% of the time, 30% of the time, then our kids are going to be okay. And the reality is if you are a professional baseball player and you bat 300, you end up in the Hall of Fame. Okay, that's 30%. Okay. So my dads, whenever I'm training them, they're like, oh, praise God, I can do it right once out of 3 times. I can do this, because we get so discouraged to stay in the game of parenting and being there for our kids. And so that is so freeing. And then the other piece of that is, when we screw it up, and we will screw it up, then we work to, apologize or rebuild the relationship. That is where the resilience comes in. And it's actually more valuable that we as parents aren't perfect
Yeah.
because you need to see how to be able to walk your way through life, right? And so that 30% number is just so freeing for the men that I work with. They're just like, I can do this. Um, and I'm like, it's okay. We got this. We can do this. And you can be the parent that you need to be. So, that's just some tidbits that kind of roll around in my head for parents.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for sharing. Are your adoptions, the process, is it an open adoption or closed adoptions?
Every adoption that comes through the foster care system and the CPS system, the Child Protective Services, those are all considered closed adoptions. Okay. However, this is what I tell parents: closed adoptions, open adoptions, you really cannot legalize those things. So when you go into adoption, you need to understand they're all open. Okay. And in the day of social media and stuff, they're all open. Okay. So we have had biological family back in our lives in different capacities. With my second set of kids, they had a biological grandmother that loved them dearly and just was not able to raise them. And so she was very interested in where these children went. We just adopted her as a grandma, and she became a grandma to all of my kids. And she even lived with that, her and her husband even lived with us for a while. So we've had those people back in our lives because we believe it's good for the children. And our deal is in an adoption is I want to always create a bridge for my kid to have a relationship with their biological family, if possible, if it's safe, and if it's what my child wants to do. So generally, the way you get found out is social media. Some kid gets an illegal social media account, and some biological family member is just curious and searching, and somehow they manage to find them. And I've had calls like that where I've gone, "Hey, so you're the biological mom, and guess what? Now we're going to figure our way through this because some of my kids are ready to talk to you, and some aren't. And you know what? I don't really care how you feel or how I feel, but I do care that we walk through this with these kids really, really well,
Yeah, yeah.
because it's important for them.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, a biological mom, in my cases, the biological mom um, generally doesn't want anything to do with the adoptive mom.
Mm.
Not not because it's bad, but a lot of times they feel so much shame and failure and everything, and then feel like I've come in to replace them, that they have a hard time connecting with me. Right. Not because we're closing any doors, but just because they carry so much baggage.
Yeah,
And when they are trying to generally get back in touch with their children, then what they are wanting to do is to basically dump is the wrong word, but dump their stuff on their kids to say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to happen that way and everything like that. And I just have to kind of coach those moms to say, you, my kids don't need to hear your whole trauma story. They need, they need to hear that maybe you're sorry or that you've missed them and stuff like that. But I need you to be healthy too, right? But these biological moms a lot of times are just as traumatized as my kids are and haven't had anybody walk them through, so trying to help them figure out the best way. And I have kids, some of my kids are like, yes, I want to know them. Other ones are, I don't want anything to do with them. And we just go wherever kind of how our children want to go, and if it's a safe way to do it, and to try and keep them healthy. And then my job is to help them figure out how to process through all that, right? And know that i'm not I'm not worried that if they have a relationship with their biological mom that they are um, cheating me out of something, or that they're hurting my feeling. It's nothing like that. I still love them very much the same, but a lot of times the kids don't, even though I tell them that, they really don't believe that. But it is true that it's okay. And it's okay, there can be more than one mom. You can have a birth mom, you can have a life mom. I'm like, shoot, if I can adopt more grandmas to take care of me, I'm in, that type of thing. So
yeah, that's amazing. I'm blessed and lucky in that sense because both of my parents, bio and adoptive, throughout the adoption process, they met each other and it was a completely different country. They met,
Hmm.
they talked, and it was a mutual understanding of what they both want to see for me and my siblings.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
they
that's
were
good.
like friends.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I see that with a lot with some more international adoptions.
Yeah.
If you're doing it and the kids are coming out of the foster care system, they've generally been taken away for neglect or abuse, and so there's a whole bigger trauma story kind of there. But I have seen that a lot with infant adoptions
Mhm.
and also with the international ones. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
which is incredible. We're running out of time. I want to keep talking, but time is not on my side. Is there anything else you'd like to share as I wrap up this episode?
I would say the number one thing, whether you're on the adoption side or whether you're on the adoptive parent side, is what is we all need to have a lot of grace with each other and to love each other, and that wins most of the time. And that the more grace I can extend and just understand and seek to understand where a person is and where they're coming from is extremely powerful. And to trust, and I say this often, to trust that God is writing a wonderful story and with my children's lives and the impact that they can make. um, and I continually pray that God will allow me to live long enough to see it all too, right? Because some of them are in hard spots. And I'm going, okay, God, I know you're still writing a good story. And so how do I help them and cling to that, and that is true, and that God will see that to completion. And then I think, just being open do to be the people that we need to be, that God's called us to be, is super powerful.
Yeah, yeah. One last question. What is the meaning of life for you?
The meaning of life for me is, I would say, for me, what gets me excited about life is I really just want to see how many people I can take to heaven with me, and love people and fully experience life on this side and on the other side, because life is just on this side, it's too short. And we've got too much to do, and people are so valued, and we just don't believe it ourselves. And so how can we, love them till they do? And that's really what life's about for me. And I like to say it in the book, it's called living your legacy now. And so that in the future, when you're gone, your legacy still impacts people. So that's why we created like Anchor Point and do the stuff that we do there, is that that's going to outlive me, and continue to impact lives and families, and this ripple effect that we want to have. And that's what life's about.
Mhm.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah.
Mm.
Where's your book at? And do you have a website? How can people find you?
Yes. And so they can learn more about Anchor Point at anchorpoint.us. Okay. And you can see the ministry stuff that we do. If you want to learn more about me, it's at thedebbie.simmons.com. And the book, The Heart of Legacy, is on there. Also, a lot of the family coaching and different things that I do. The therapeutic camp that we do, if any adoptive families are around the Houston area, that's on the Anchor Point site, where they can learn about that. There's applications that are open for people to attend camp this summer. But all the social media handles and all that stuff are there. And it's, you can get follow, like, share, whatever they tell me I'm supposed to do with that. So that would be great.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Well, Debbie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. I know your story has empowered me. It's going to help me heal. I needed to hear your experience to look at adoption or adoptive parents at a different angle and lens. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.